I never thought the woman I welcomed into my family with open arms would be the one to push me down a flight of basement stairs. But as I lay there at the bottom, my ribs screaming in pain and my left ankle twisted at an unnatural angle, I finally saw Jessica for who she truly was. The sweet, innocent girl my son Marcus had fallen in love with was nothing but a mask hiding a calculating, greedy woman who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to her inheritance. What Jessica didn't know was that earlier that morning I had just finished updating my will. The $4.2 million estate she thought was practically hers? She was about to learn that assumptions can be very, very expensive. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It all started 3 months ago when I decided to move back into the family home after living in my downtown condo for 5 years. At 72, I was still sharp, still independent, but my doctor had suggested I might benefit from having family nearby. After my minor heart episode last spring, Marcus had been asking me to move back in for years, and Jessica had always seemed supportive of the idea. "Mom, you know you're always welcome here," Marcus would say whenever the topic came up. "This house is too big for just Jess and me anyway." Jessica would nod enthusiastically, her perfect smile never wavering. "Of course, Mom Carol. We'd love to have you. This is your home after all." Their enthusiasm should have been my first warning sign. The house had been in our family for 3 generations. My late husband Robert and I had raised Marcus there. And when Robert passed away 8 years ago, I'd moved to the condo to give Marcus and Jessica space to start their own family. The plan was always that Marcus would eventually inherit the property, but I'd maintained ownership and continued paying the property taxes and major maintenance costs. Looking back now, I realized Jessica had been playing a long game from the moment she married my son 4 years ago. She'd been sweet, attentive, always remembering my birthday and bringing me thoughtful gifts. She'd listened to my stories about Robert with what seemed like genuine interest, and she'd made such a fuss about wanting to learn my grandmother's recipes. "I want to carry on the family traditions," she'd say, her eyes wide and earnest. "It's so important to me that Marcus feels connected to his heritage." I'd been charmed. After Robert's death, I'd felt so lonely, and Jessica's warmth had been like sunshine after a long winter. I'd even started thinking of her as the daughter I'd never had. How naive I was. The first crack in the facade appeared just 2 weeks after I moved back in. I'd gone down to the basement to retrieve some of Robert's old photo albums from storage. The basement had always been my domain. I'd organized it meticulously over the years, with clearly labeled boxes containing decades of family memories, holiday decorations, and keepsakes. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I stopped in shock. Half of my storage boxes had been moved, and several were sitting open with their contents scattered across the floor. Photo albums were stacked carelessly in a corner, and I could see that someone had been going through Robert's things. "Jessica?" I called upstairs. "Could you come down here for a moment?" She appeared at the top of the stairs, and something in her expression made my stomach clench. Gone was the warm smile I'd grown accustomed to. Her face was cold, almost calculating. "What is it, Carol?" Her voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. "Someone's been going through the storage boxes. Robert's things are all mixed up." She shrugged, not even bothering to come down and look. "I needed some space for my things. Some of this old junk has been down there for decades." "Old junk?" I couldn't hide my shock. "These are family heirlooms. Robert's military medals, our wedding photos, Marcus's baby pictures." "Look, Carol," Jessica interrupted, her voice sharp. "I know this was your house once, but Marcus and I live here now. We need the storage space for our stuff. Maybe it's time you figured out what's actually worth keeping and got rid of the rest." I climbed back upstairs in stunned silence. That evening, when Marcus came home from work, I mentioned what had happened, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Oh, that?" Marcus said, not even looking up from his phone. Yeah, Jess mentioned she was reorganizing down there. She's been wanting to set up a home gym in part of the basement. But Marcus, those are your father's things. Your baby pictures, your report cards. I saved everything from your childhood. Mom, I'm 35 years old. I don't need you keeping my second-grade art projects. His tone was dismissive, almost irritated. Besides, if there's anything really important, you can just keep it in your room upstairs. My room upstairs, as if I were a boarder in my own home. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That night, I lay awake thinking about the interaction. Jessica's coldness had been jarring, but Marcus's response was what really hurt. When had my son become so callous about family history? When had he started talking to me like I was an inconvenience? Over the following weeks, things continued to deteriorate. Jessica's mask didn't just slip, it fell off completely. She stopped, pretending to be interested in my stories, often walking away mid-sentence when I was talking. She'd make passive-aggressive comments about my cooking, my housekeeping, even my television preferences. "Carol, do you have to watch the news so loud?" she'd say, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Some of us are trying to relax after a long day." When I'd lower the volume, she'd add, "You know, there are some really nice senior communities in the area. Places where you could make friends your own age." The message was clear. I wasn't welcome in my own home. But the real shock came when I overheard a phone conversation between Jessica and her mother 3 weeks after I'd moved back in. I'd gone to the kitchen for a glass of water and heard Jessica's voice carrying from the living room. "No, Mom, she's not getting the hint," Jessica was saying, her voice frustrated. "I thought she'd stay a month or two and then go back to her condo, but she's acting like she lives here permanently." There was a pause as her mother responded. I know. But the house is worth at least $800,000, and that's not even counting all the other assets. Marcus said she's got investments and savings worth several million. We just have to be patient." My blood ran cold. Several million? How did she know about my financial situation? "The problem is, she's healthy as a horse," Jessica continued. "She could live another 20 years, and I'm not spending 2 decades playing happy family with that old bat. We need to figure out a way to get her out of here before she changes her will or something crazy like that." I backed away from the kitchen, my heart pounding. I managed to make it back to my room without being seen, but I couldn't shake what I'd heard. Jessica wasn't just eager for me to leave. She was actively planning to inherit my money. That night, I did something I should have done years ago. I called my attorney, Harold Brennan, who'd been handling my legal affairs since Robert's death. "Harold, I need to review my will," I said when he picked up the phone. "Of course, Carol. Is everything all right? You sound upset." "I'm fine, but I want to make some changes. Significant changes." We scheduled a meeting for the following week. In the meantime, I started paying closer attention to Jessica's behavior, and what I saw made my stomach turn. She wasn't just cold. To me, she was manipulative, often stirring up small conflicts between Marcus and me. "Your mother left dishes in the sink again," she'd tell Marcus when he came home, her voice carrying just the right note of long-suffering patience. "I don't mind cleaning up after her, but it would be nice if she made an effort." Never mind that. I'd washed and dried those same dishes just an hour before she came home and used them for her afternoon snack. "Mom rearranged the living room furniture while we were out," she'd report another day. "I think she's having some memory issues. Maybe we should consider getting her evaluated." In reality, I'd simply moved a chair 6 inches to get better light for reading, then moved it back. Marcus, bless his heart, believed every word she said. He'd approach me with concerns about my adjustment issues and suggestions about activities for people my age. My own son was being turned against me by a woman who saw dollar signs every time she looked at me. The meeting with Harold was eye-opening. We reviewed my current will, which left everything to Marcus with Jessica as a secondary beneficiary if something happened to my son. Harold explained the implications and walked me through various options for restructuring my estate. I want to make some changes, I told him. Significant ones. But I wasn't ready to make any hasty decisions. Despite everything, Marcus was still my son, and I wanted to give him a chance to see Jessica for who she really was. I hoped that maybe, if I was patient and careful, he'd come to his senses. That hope died on a Tuesday morning in late October. I'd woken up early and decided to do some organizing in the basement. Despite Jessica's complaints about old junk, I wasn't ready to throw away decades of family history. I thought if I could reorganize everything more efficiently, maybe we could find a compromise. I'd been down there for about an hour, carefully going through boxes of Robert's military service records, when I heard footsteps on the stairs. I looked up to see Jessica descending, but something about her demeanor made me uneasy. She moved, with purpose, and her face wore an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, determined, almost predatory. "Jessica, what are you doing down here?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked over to where I was kneeling beside an open box and stood over me. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat, emotionless. "We need to talk, Carol." I struggled. To my feet, my knees protesting after an hour of kneeling on the concrete floor. "Of course, dear. What about?" "About you leaving." The bluntness of it caught me off guard. "Leaving? This isn't working out. You moving back in here. It's causing problems for Marcus and me. We need our space, and you need to go back to your condo." I felt a flash of anger. "Jessica, this is my house. I've been more than accommodating." "No." She cut me off, stepping closer. "This is Marcus's house now. You've been living here like a guest for 3 months, and it's time for you to find somewhere else to go." "Marcus has never said anything like that to me." Jessica smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Marcus doesn't want to hurt your feelings, but he's tired of having you here too. We both are." "I don't believe you." "Believe whatever you want," she said, shrugging. "But you're leaving, one way or another." Something in her tone made my blood run cold. "What's that supposed to mean?" Instead of answering, Jessica took another step toward me. I instinctively backed up, but I was already near the wall with nowhere to go. "You know, Carol, basements can be dangerous places for elderly people. All these stairs, concrete floors, poor lighting, accidents happen all the time." The threat was unmistakable. My heart started racing as I realized the precarious position I was in. I was alone in the basement with a woman who had just essentially threatened me, and no one else was home. "Jessica, you're scaring me. Let's go upstairs and talk about this, calmly." "Oh, we're going to settle this right now." Her voice was ice cold. "You're going to pack your things today and be out of here by tomorrow. And you're not going to say a word to Marcus about this conversation?" "Absolutely not. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm certainly going to tell my son that his wife just threatened me." That's when Jessica's composure finally cracked. Her face contorted with rage, and she grabbed my arm roughly. "You stupid old woman. Don't you get it? Marcus chose me. He doesn't want you here anymore. No one wants you here." I tried to pull away from her grip, but she held on tighter. "Let go of me, Jessica." "You're going to ruin everything," she screamed. "I've worked too hard to let some bitter old widow destroy my future." I managed to break free from her grasp, but the sudden movement sent me stumbling backward. My heel caught on the edge of a box that had been left in the walkway, and I felt myself losing balance. For a split second, I thought I might be able to catch myself. But then I felt Jessica's hands on my shoulders, not helping to steady me, but pushing. Hard. The world seemed to slow down as I fell backward toward the stairs. I had just enough time to realize what was happening before my back hit the edge of a step, and I went tumbling down the wooden staircase. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. My ribs screamed as I bounced off the steps, and I felt something pop in my ankle as I hit the concrete floor at the bottom. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but lie there in agony. Through the haze of pain, I heard Jessica's voice from the top of the stairs. "Carol? Oh my God, Carol. Are you okay?" The concern in her voice was so convincing that for a moment I almost doubted what had just happened. Almost. I can't move. I managed to gasp out. "Don't move. I'm calling 911. I heard her footsteps running upstairs, and then the sound of her making a frantic phone call. Even through my pain and shock, I had to admire her performance. She sounded like a genuinely distressed daughter-in-law who had just discovered her mother-in-law at the bottom of the basement stairs. "Please hurry," she was saying into the phone. "I just found her down there. She must have fallen." "Yes, she's conscious, but I think she's badly hurt." As I lay there waiting for the paramedics, several things became crystal clear to me. First, Jessica had pushed me down those stairs deliberately. Second, she was already spinning the story to make it look like an accident. And third, if I'd been seriously injured, or worse, she would have gotten away with it completely. But I wasn't dead. I wasn't even unconscious. And Jessica had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The paramedics arrived within 10 minutes, followed closely by Marcus, who Jessica had called right after 911. As they carefully loaded me onto a stretcher, I watched Jessica's Oscar-worthy performance continue. "I just went down to check on her," she told Marcus, tears streaming down her face. "She was lying at the bottom of the stairs. She must have tripped on something." Marcus was distraught, holding my hand as they carried me to the ambulance. "Mom, what happened? Are you in a lot of pain?" I looked up at my son's worried face, then over at Jessica, who was watching me intently. Even now, she was calculating, trying to gauge whether I remembered what had really happened. "I fell," I said simply, "down the stairs." Jessica's shoulders relaxed slightly, but she needn't have bothered. I wasn't going to tell Marcus the truth, not yet, but that didn't mean I was going to let her get away with what she'd done. As the ambulance pulled away from the house, I closed my eyes and started planning. Jessica thought she'd won, that she'd successfully eliminated the obstacle to her inheritance. She had no idea that she'd just signed her own financial death warrant. By the time I got out of the hospital, Jessica would discover that pushing me down those stairs was the most expensive mistake she'd ever made in her life. The next 3 days in St. Mary's Hospital gave me plenty of time to think, and what I discovered during those long, painful hours would change everything. As I lay there with 3 cracked ribs, a sprained ankle, and bruises covering half my body, I realized that Jessica's attack wasn't just a moment of rage. It was part of a calculated plan that had been months in the making. Dr. Martinez, a kind woman in her 40s who reminded me of my younger self, was checking my vitals when she casually mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "Mrs. Henderson, I have to ask, have you been having any issues with balance or dizziness lately? Any memory problems?" I frowned. "No, not at all. Why do you ask?" "Well, according to the information we received, your daughter-in-law mentioned that you've been having some concerning episodes recently. Falls, confusion, forgetting things. She seemed quite worried about your cognitive function." My heart started racing, and it wasn't from the pain medication. "Doctor, I can assure you that I have no memory issues whatsoever. I've never fallen before this incident, and my mind is perfectly clear." Dr. Martinez looked puzzled. "That's interesting. She was quite insistent that you'd been showing signs of dementia. She even suggested we might want to do a cognitive evaluation while you're here." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Jessica hadn't just pushed me down the stairs on impulse. She'd been laying the groundwork for weeks, maybe months, to make it look like I was becoming mentally incompetent. If I had died from the fall, or if I'd suffered brain damage, she would have had the perfect cover story. Poor Jessica, trying so hard to care for her increasingly confused mother-in-law who tragically fell down the stairs. "Doctor," I said carefully, "I'd like to take every cognitive test you have available. I want it thoroughly documented that my mental faculties are completely intact." Dr. Martinez agreed, and over the next day I underwent extensive testing. The results, as I knew they would be, showed that my cognitive function was not only normal, but actually above average for my age group. I made sure to get copies of everything for my records. But the most revealing moment came on my second day in the hospital, when Jessica visited alone. Marcus had gone home to shower and change clothes, and she clearly thought this was her opportunity to cement her story. She entered my room wearing the perfect mask of concern, furrowed brow, sad eyes, even bringing flowers that she'd probably picked up from the hospital gift shop. But I was watching her more carefully now, and I could see the calculation behind the performance. "Oh, Carol," she said, placing the flowers on my bedside table. "How are you feeling? I've been so worried." "I'm recovering," I said neutrally. She pulled a chair close to my bed and leaned forward, her voice dropping to a concerned whisper. "Carol, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Do you remember what happened before you fell?" "I remember going down to the basement to organize some boxes." "And then what?" I studied her face carefully. She was trying to look sympathetic, but there was something predatory in her eyes. "I remember falling down the stairs." "Do you remember talking to me? I came down to check on you because you'd been down there for hours. You seemed confused, disoriented. You were talking about Robert as if he were still alive. My husband had been dead for 8 years. I had never, not once, forgotten that fact or spoken about him as if he were still living. Jessica was fabricating memories, trying to plant seeds of doubt about my mental state. "I don't remember that," I said carefully. "The doctor mentioned that head injuries can cause memory problems," Jessica continued, her voice dripping with false concern. "Maybe you don't remember because of the concussion. But Carol, I'm worried about you. This isn't the first time you've seemed confused lately." "What do you mean?" "Well, there was last week when you forgot that Marcus had already left for work and kept calling for him. And the day before that when you put salt in your coffee instead of sugar and didn't seem to notice. None of this had happened. Not even close." Jessica was constructing an elaborate fiction about my supposed mental decline, and she was doing it while I lay helpless in a hospital bed. "I think," she said, reaching over to pat my hand with fake tenderness, "that when you get out of here, we need to seriously consider getting you some help. Maybe a nice assisted living facility where trained professionals can keep an eye on you." The audacity of it took my breath away. She'd tried to seriously injure me, and now she was using my hospitalization as an opportunity to continue her campaign to get me out of the house and possibly declared incompetent. "Jessica," I said quietly, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. My mind is perfectly clear. I remember everything that happened in that basement, including our conversation right before I fell." For just a moment, her mask slipped. I saw a flash of panic cross her face before she regained her composure. "Carol, you're confused. We didn't have a conversation. I found you at the bottom of the stairs." "Did you?" We stared at each other for a long moment. She was trying to gauge how much I actually remembered, and I was letting her wonder. Finally, she stood up. "I should let you rest. I'll tell Marcus you're doing well." After she left, I immediately called Harold Brennan. "Harold, I need you to come to the hospital, tonight, and bring everything we need to completely rewrite my will." "Carol, you're in the hospital. This can wait until—" "No, it can't wait. Harold, I'm going to tell you some things that are going to shock you, and then we're going to make sure that certain people never see a penny of my money." Harold arrived that evening with his briefcase and a portable printer. After I told him everything, the overheard phone conversation, Jessica's threats, the deliberate push down the stairs, and her attempt to fabricate a history of mental decline, His face was grim. "Carol, if what you're telling me is true, we're not just talking about changing your will. We're talking about assault, elder abuse, and possibly attempted murder. I know, but I need to be smart about this. If I accuse Jessica directly, it becomes my word against hers, and she's already started building a narrative about my supposed mental problems. I need to handle this differently. What do you have in mind?" "First, we're going to completely restructure my estate. Jessica gets nothing, not $1. In fact, I want specific language stating that she's been disinherited and the reasons why." Harold nodded, taking notes. "And Marcus?" That was the hard part. My son wasn't evil like his wife, but he'd been completely manipulated by her. He'd also shown himself to be callous about my feelings and dismissive of my concerns. Still, he was my son. Marcus gets a modest inheritance, enough to live comfortably, but not enough to fund Jessica's lifestyle. The bulk of my estate goes elsewhere. Where? I'd been thinking about this since Jessica's hospital visit. I want to establish a foundation for elder abuse prevention and education. I want my money to help other seniors who might be in situations like mine. That's a beautiful legacy, Carol. And I want you to set up a trust for Marcus's future children, if he has any after he hopefully comes to his senses and divorces Jessica. The money would be available for education, healthcare, that sort of thing. But Jessica would have no access to it. We worked for 3 hours that night, crafting a new will that would ensure my money went to causes I believed in, rather than to a woman who'd tried to seriously harm me. By the time Harold left, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. But I wasn't done. The next morning, I called my bank and made some additional arrangements. If Jessica wanted to play games, I was going to show her what a real strategic mind could accomplish. Marcus visited that afternoon, looking haggard and worried. Despite everything, seeing my son's genuine concern for my well-being softened my heart. He wasn't evil. He was just blind to his wife's true nature. "Mom, I've been thinking about what happened," he said, pulling his chair close to my bed. "Maybe it's time we made some changes to the house. Better lighting in the basement, maybe handrails on the stairs. I don't want you to get hurt again." "That's thoughtful of you, Marcus. And Jess has been doing some research about home care services. She found some really good companies that specialize in helping seniors stay independent while making sure they're safe." I almost laughed. Jessica was still pushing her narrative, now recruiting Marcus to help convince me that I needed supervised care. She probably figured that if she couldn't get me out of the house, she'd get professional caregivers in who would document my supposed mental decline. "Marcus, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think I'm losing my mind?" He looked uncomfortable. "Mom, that's not... it's a simple question. Do you think I have dementia or memory problems? Jess mentioned that you've been having some episodes, small things but concerning." "What episodes?" He shifted in his chair. "Like talking about Dad as if he's still alive, or forgetting conversations we've had. Jess is just worried about you." I felt a deep sadness settle over me. My own son was so completely under Jessica's influence that he was willing to believe I was mentally declining based on her lies. But I also heard something else in his voice. Doubt. He wasn't entirely convinced, which gave me hope. "Marcus, I want you to know that my mind is completely clear. I've taken extensive cognitive tests here at the hospital, and the results show that my mental function is entirely normal. In fact, it's above average for my age." That's great, Mom. Really. I also want you to know that I love you very much, and nothing will ever change that. But I'm concerned about some of the influences in your life." He frowned. "What do you mean?" Before I could answer, Jessica appeared in the doorway. She must have been listening from the hallway, because her timing was too perfect to be coincidental. "How's our patient doing?" she asked brightly. moving to Marcus's side and placing a possessive hand on his shoulder. "Much better," I said, watching her carefully. "Dr. Martinez says I should be able to go home tomorrow." "That's wonderful news," Jessica said, but I caught a flash of something that might have been disappointment in her eyes. "Marcus and I have been preparing for your return. We've made some changes to make the house safer for you." "What kind of changes?" Marcus brightened. "We moved all your things out of the basement so you won't need to go down there anymore. And we're converting the den on the first floor into a bedroom for you so you won't have to use the stairs." My heart sank. They were essentially confining me to the first floor of my own house, isolating me from my belongings and limiting my mobility. Worse, Marcus seemed to think this was helpful. "That's very thoughtful," I said carefully. "But I don't think that's necessary. I've been using stairs my entire life." "Mom, you just fell down a flight of stairs and ended up in the hospital," Marcus said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that reminded me painfully of how Jessica spoke to me. "We're just trying to keep you safe." "Safe?" I repeated. "Yes, I suppose safety is important." Jessica smiled sweetly. "We just want what's best for you, Carol. We're family, after all." Family. The word felt bitter in my mouth coming from her, but I smiled back just as sweetly. "Of course, family is everything." After they left, I made 2 more phone calls. The first was to a private investigator recommended by Harold. If Jessica had been planning this campaign against me for months, there might be evidence of it: emails, text messages, conversations with friends or family. I wanted to know exactly what I was dealing with. The second call was to my longtime friend Eleanor, who lived in California. Eleanor and I had been close since college, and she was one of the few people who knew me well enough to vouch for my mental state if it ever became necessary. "Eleanor, I need a favor," I said when she answered. "A big one." "Anything, Carol. What's wrong? You sound upset." I told her everything, and by the time I finished, Eleanor was furious. "That little witch tried to kill you. I can't prove that." "Eleanor, but I can prove other things, and I'm going to need your help." "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to start calling me regularly, daily. And I need you to document our conversations, the date, time, what we talked about, how I sounded. If Jessica tries to claim I'm mentally incompetent, I want evidence from an independent source that shows otherwise." "Consider it done. But Carol, are you sure you're safe going back to that house?" That was the question I'd been asking myself, but I'd decided that running away would only play into Jessica's hands. She wanted me out of the house, wanted me isolated and vulnerable. The best way to fight back was to stay exactly where I was, and let her make mistakes. "I'm safe because I know what she is now," I told Eleanor, "and because I'm not the helpless old woman she thinks I am." The next morning, Dr. Martinez discharged me with instructions for follow-up care and physical therapy for my ankle. Marcus and Jessica picked me up, and Jessica's performance of caring daughter-in-law was flawless. She helped me into the car, fussed over my comfort, and chattered about all the preparations they'd made for my return. But I noticed that she kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, and there was something calculating in those glances. She was still trying to figure out how much I remembered and how much of a threat I posed to her plans. As we pulled into the driveway of my family home, I felt a sense of determination settle over me. Jessica thought she'd won the first battle by putting me in the hospital. She had no idea that she'd actually just declared war on someone with 40 years more life experience, considerably more money, and absolutely nothing left to lose. The real battle was just beginning, and this time I would be ready for her. Coming home from the hospital felt like entering enemy territory. The house I'd lived in for over 30 years now felt foreign and hostile, with Jessica's presence poisoning every room. But I wasn't the same woman who'd been pushed down those stairs 5 days ago. I was armed with knowledge, legal protection, and most importantly, a plan. The changes they'd made to accommodate my return were immediately obvious and deeply insulting. The beautiful den where Robert and I used to read together in the evenings had been converted into what looked like a nursing home room. There was a hospital bed, a bedside commode, and even a wheelchair parked in the corner. "We thought this would be more comfortable for you," Jessica said, gesturing around the room with fake enthusiasm. "Everything you need is right here on the first floor. No stairs to worry about." Marcus nodded eagerly. "And we've arranged for a home health aide to come by 3 times a week to check on you and help with anything you need." I stared at my son in disbelief. "Marcus, I sprained my ankle and cracked some ribs. I didn't have a stroke." "Mom, you're 72 years old and you just had a serious fall. We're just being cautious." Jessica placed her hand on Marcus's arm in a gesture that looked supportive but felt possessive. "The aide's name is Patricia. She has experience with seniors who have cognitive issues." There it was again, the subtle insertion of the idea that I was mentally compromised. But this time I was ready for it. "How thoughtful," I said calmly. "But I'll need to see Patricia's credentials and run a background check before I allow a stranger into my home. I'm sure you understand. With all the elder abuse cases we hear about these days, one can never be too careful." Jessica's smile faltered slightly. She clearly hadn't expected me to take charge of the situation. "Of course," she said, recovering quickly. "We just want you to feel secure." "Security is very important," I agreed. "In fact, I've decided to upgrade the home security system. New cameras, motion sensors, the works. I want to make sure we're all protected." I watched Jessica's face carefully as I said this. The flash of alarm in her eyes was brief but unmistakable. The idea of cameras monitoring her movements clearly made her uncomfortable. Over the next few days, I settled into a routine that must have been frustrating for Jessica. I was polite, cooperative, and gave no indication that I suspected her of anything more than mild selfishness. I used the makeshift bedroom without complaint, accepted help when it was offered, and even praised their thoughtfulness in front of Marcus. But I was also documenting everything. Every conversation, every interaction, every attempt to control my activities or question my mental state. I kept detailed notes in a journal that I hid in my room, and I made sure Eleanor knew about every incident during our daily phone calls. The home health aide situation provided my first real opportunity to test Jessica's commitment to her narrative. Patricia Williams turned out to be a competent, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who specialized in post-injury recovery rather than dementia care. "Mrs. Henderson," she said during our first meeting, "I've reviewed your medical records from the hospital. You seem to be recovering very well from your injuries. Your cognitive test scores are excellent." "Thank you, Patricia. I feel quite myself." "Good. Now, your daughter-in-law mentioned some concerns about memory issues and confusion, but I don't see any documentation of that in your medical files. Has your doctor expressed any concerns about cognitive decline?" "No, none at all. In fact, Dr. Martinez specifically noted that my mental function is above average for my age." Patricia made a note in her file. "I'll include that in my report. Sometimes family members can be overprotective after a medical emergency." I made sure Jessica was within earshot when I thanked Patricia for her professional assessment of my cognitive abilities. Jessica's jaw tightened, but she couldn't argue with a medical professional's evaluation. The security system installation provided another revealing moment. I'd hired Secure Home Solutions, one of the city's most reputable companies, and explained that I wanted comprehensive coverage both inside and outside the house. "We'll put cameras in all the common areas," the technician explained to me, Marcus, and Jessica as we walked through the house. "Living room, kitchen, hallways, and exterior entrances. We can also install motion sensors in the basement and other areas where you might not need constant video monitoring." "What about the basement?" I asked innocently. "I'd like cameras there, too. After my fall, I want to make sure we can see exactly what happened if there's ever another accident." Jessica spoke up quickly. "Is that really necessary? Carol won't be using the basement anymore." "Better safe than sorry," I said firmly. And who knows? Maybe someday I'll feel comfortable going downstairs again. I'd like to have that option. The technician nodded. We can definitely include the basement. The cameras will have full audio and video recording, and everything will be stored in the cloud for 30 days. I saw Jessica exchange a worried glance with Marcus. She was clearly uncomfortable with the idea of having her movements recorded, especially in the basement where she'd pushed me down the stairs. That evening, I overheard another phone conversation between Jessica and her mother. This time, I was prepared, using a small recording device that Harold had suggested I carry. "Mom, she's not acting like someone who's losing her mind," Jessica was saying, her voice frustrated. "The home health aide says she's completely normal, and now she's installing security cameras everywhere." Her mother's voice was faint, but I could make out some of her response. "Told you this was risky? Should have waited." "I couldn't wait any longer," Jessica snapped. "She could live another 20 years and I'm not spending my entire life playing nursemaid to that old bat. Besides, it should have worked. She should have been hurt worse." There it was, admission that she'd intended to cause me serious harm. I kept recording. "Well, you need to figure something else out," her mother continued. "Maybe you could get her declared incompetent." "I've been trying. But every doctor who examines her says she's fine. Even Marcus is starting to question whether she really has memory problems." "Then maybe it's time to cut your losses. Take what you can get and move on." "No way. I've invested 4 years in this family, and I'm not walking away empty-handed. That house alone is worth almost $1 million. Not to mention her investment portfolio. I know she's got at least $4 million saved up." I smiled grimly in the darkness. Jessica's estimate was off by quite a bit, but it confirmed that she'd been researching my financial situation extensively. The recording was invaluable, but I needed more evidence. The next morning, I called Harold again. "I need you to hire a forensic accountant," I told him. "I want to know if there's been any unusual activity with my accounts, or if anyone has been trying to access my financial information." "Carol? That's a serious step. Are you sure?" "Harold, Jessica knew specific details about my net worth that she shouldn't have had access to. Either she's been snooping through my personal papers, or she's found another way to get that information." The forensic accountant, David Chen, was a quiet man with an impressive reputation for uncovering financial fraud. Within 48 hours of our meeting, he called with disturbing news. "Mrs. Henderson, someone has been running credit checks and financial background searches on you regularly over the past 8 months. The searches were sophisticated and would have required access to your Social Security number and other personal information. Can you trace where the searches came from? They were initiated from several different locations, but I've identified at least 3 that match addresses associated with your daughter-in-law's family. It appears someone has been monitoring your financial status very closely. This was more than idle curiosity. It was systematic surveillance of my assets." Combined with the recorded conversation, it painted a picture of a deliberate long-term scheme to gain access to my money. But Jessica wasn't finished. 3 days after the security system was installed, she made her boldest move yet. I was in the kitchen making lunch when she approached me with a folder in her hands and an expression of deep concern on her face. "Carol, I need to talk to you about something important." "What is it, dear?" She sat down across from me at the kitchen table and opened the folder. Inside were several official-looking documents. "I've been doing some research about estate planning for seniors, and I've learned some troubling things about what can happen if someone becomes incapacitated without proper legal protections in place." I kept my expression neutral. "What kind of protections?" "Well, if something happened to you, another fall, a stroke, anything that affected your mental capacity, the state could end up controlling your assets. Everything you've worked for could be tied up in court for years." She slid a document across the table to me. "I've had a lawyer prepare a power of attorney agreement. It would give Marcus and me the authority to manage your affairs if you ever became unable to do so yourself. It's really just a safety net." I looked down at the papers. It was indeed a power of attorney document, but not the limited kind that most families used for emergencies. This was a broad, durable power of attorney that would give Jessica and Marcus complete control over my finances, healthcare decisions, and living arrangements. If I signed it, they could empty my bank accounts, sell my house, and even have me committed to a care facility against my will. "This is very comprehensive," I said, continuing to read. "It gives you authority over, well, everything." "We would never abuse that authority," Jessica said quickly. "But Carol, given your recent memory issues and the fall, we need to be prepared for any eventuality." There were those mythical memory issues again. Jessica was still pushing that narrative despite all evidence to the contrary. "I appreciate your concern," I said carefully, "but I'm not comfortable signing something this broad without having my own attorney review it first." Jessica's mask slipped slightly. "Carol, we're your family. Don't you trust us?" "Of course I trust you. But Harold has been my lawyer for 15 years, and he knows my wishes better than anyone. Surely you can understand why I'd want him to look this over." "Fine," she said, but her voice was tight with frustration. "But don't take too long. Legal protections like this are most effective when they're put in place before they're needed." After she left the kitchen, I called Harold immediately. "She's trying to get me to sign a durable power of attorney," I told him. "It would give her complete control over my life." "Absolutely do not sign anything," Harold said firmly. "In fact, I think it's time we discussed getting a restraining order. What she's doing could be classified as elder abuse and financial exploitation." "Not yet," I said. "I want to see how far she's willing to go, but I do want you to prepare something for me." "What?" "A letter. I want it to detail everything that's happened. The push down the stairs, the lies about my mental state, the attempts to gain control of my finances. I want it sealed and stored in your office safe, with instructions that it should be opened if anything happens to me." "Carol, you're starting to scare me." "Good, because I'm starting to scare myself. Jessica is getting desperate, and desperate people do dangerous things." That evening at dinner, Jessica brought up the power of attorney again, this time in front of Marcus. "Did you have a chance to think about those legal documents I showed you?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes watchful. "I'm still considering them," I replied. "Harold is reviewing the paperwork." Marcus looked between us, confused. "What documents?" Jessica explained about the power of attorney, framing it as a necessary precaution for my protection. Marcus nodded, along, clearly thinking it sounded reasonable. "That makes sense, Mom," he said, "especially after what happened with the fall. We just want to make sure you're taken care of." "I understand your concern," I said, "but I've been managing my own affairs for 72 years. I think I can continue to do so for a while longer." Jessica's voice took on a patronizing tone. "Carol, no one is questioning your abilities, but accidents happen, and cognitive decline can be sudden. It's better to have protections in place before you need them." "Cognitive decline?" I repeated. "Jessica, I've taken multiple cognitive assessments since my fall, and they all show that my mental function is completely normal." "Of course they do," she said, her tone suggesting that she thought the tests were inadequate. "But early-stage dementia can be very subtle. Sometimes family members notice changes before medical professionals do." I set down my fork and looked directly at her. "What changes have you noticed?" She glanced at Marcus before answering. "Well, there was the incident last week where you forgot that Marcus had already left for work and kept calling for him, and you've been repeating stories that you've already told us." Both statements were complete fabrications, but Jessica delivered them with such conviction that I could see Marcus starting to look concerned. "I don't recall those incidents," I said calmly. "That's exactly what I mean," Jessica said, leaning forward with fake sympathy. "Memory problems often start with forgetting that you've forgotten things." It was a clever trap. If I insisted that these incidents hadn't happened, Jessica could claim that my denial was proof of my mental decline. If I accepted her version of events, she could use that as evidence that I was indeed having cognitive problems. But I had something Jessica didn't know about: the security cameras that were now recording our entire conversation. "You know what?" I said, standing up from the table. "You're absolutely right to be concerned. In fact, I think it would be helpful if we documented these episodes you're describing. The security cameras will help us keep track of my behavior patterns so we can provide accurate information to my doctors." The color drained from Jessica's face. She clearly hadn't considered that the cameras she'd objected to installing would also record her lies about my mental state. That's not necessary," she stammered. "I'm sure you'll be fine." "Oh, but I insist," I said with a sweet smile. "If I'm really having these memory problems, it's important that we have objective evidence to share with my medical team. The cameras will show exactly what happened during these incidents you're concerned about." Jessica excused herself from dinner shortly after that, claiming she had a headache. But I knew the real reason she left the table. She was finally starting to realize that she might have underestimated her opponent. As I cleaned up the dinner dishes, I felt a sense of satisfaction I hadn't experienced in months. Jessica had spent weeks building an elaborate fiction about my mental decline, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd built her lies on things that could be proven false, and now I had the tools to prove it. The war was far from over, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was winning. The next 2 weeks brought an uneasy calm to the house, like the quiet before a thunderstorm. Jessica had become more careful with her words, clearly aware that the security cameras were recording everything, but I could see the desperation growing in her eyes as her plans continued to fall apart. She was like a cornered animal, and that made her more dangerous than ever. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning when Marcus left early for a business trip to Chicago. He'd be gone for 3 days, leaving Jessica and me alone in the house for the first time since my accident. I should have seen what was coming, but even I underestimated how far she was willing to go. I was in the kitchen having my morning coffee when Jessica appeared, dressed unusually formally in a dark business suit. Her expression was cold and determined. The mask had come off completely. "We need to talk, Carol. Really talk this time." "Of course, dear. What's on your mind?" She sat down across from me and placed a manila envelope on the table. "You're going to sign these papers, and then you're going to pack your things and move into Sunset Manor." Sunset Manor was a budget nursing home on the outskirts of town with a reputation for poor care and financial irregularities. I'd driven past it once and been appalled by the conditions. "I'm not going anywhere, Jessica." "Yes, you are." Her voice was ice cold. "Because if you don't, I'm going to tell everyone that you tried to seduce Marcus. I have photos that will be very convincing." I stared at her in disgust. "You're threatening to fabricate evidence of incest?" "I'm threatening to destroy your reputation and your relationship with your son forever. Who do you think he'll believe? His loving wife or his increasingly unstable mother who's been showing signs of dementia?" She pulled out her phone and showed me several photos. They'd been cleverly edited to make innocent interactions look inappropriate. A hug goodnight that looked like an embrace, a hand on his shoulder that appeared possessive. With the right narrative, they could indeed be damaging. "You're sick," I said quietly. "I'm practical. You're worth more to me dead than alive, Carol. But I'll settle for you being out of the picture entirely. Sign the power of attorney papers, commit yourself to Sunset Manor, and I'll make sure you're comfortable there. Refuse, and I'll make your life so miserable that you'll wish you died in that basement." Something in her tone made my blood run cold. She wasn't just talking about social embarrassment. She was threatening physical harm. "And if I still refuse?" Jessica smiled, and it was the most chilling expression I'd ever seen. Accidents happen all the time to elderly people living alone. Falls downstairs, gas leaks, medication mix-ups. It would be tragic, really. Poor Marcus would be devastated to lose his mother so soon after she'd become so unstable. I felt a chill run down my spine. She was openly threatening to kill me if I didn't comply with her demands. This wasn't just greed anymore. It was pure evil. I need time to think about this, I said carefully. You have until tonight. Marcus comes home tomorrow, and by then you'll either be in Sunset Manor or I'll start circulating those photos. Your choice. After she left for what she claimed was a doctor's appointment, I called Harold immediately. She's escalating, I told him. She's making open threats now, and I think she's planning to do something drastic. Carol, you need to get out of that house right now. No, if I run, she wins, and she'll just find another way to get to me later. I'm going to end this today. What are you planning? I'm going to give Jessica exactly what she wants, a chance to finish what she started in the basement. Harold was horrified, but I'd already made up my mind. I called Detective Ray Morrison, whom Harold had introduced me to earlier in the week. Morrison specialized in elder abuse cases and had been quietly investigating Jessica based on the evidence I'd provided. Detective Morrison, I need your help with a sting operation. Mrs. Henderson, what are you thinking? I explained my plan. It was risky, but it was the only way to get undeniable proof of Jessica's intentions. Morrison was reluctant, but agreed to have officers positioned around the house. You'll be wired for sound and video, he said. We'll be monitoring everything. If she makes any move toward violence, we'll intervene immediately. That afternoon, I called Jessica and told her I'd decided to sign the papers. I asked her to meet me in the basement at 6 p.m. to discuss the arrangements privately, away from the security cameras in the main house. What Jessica didn't know was that I'd had additional cameras installed in the basement the day before, cameras that the original security company hadn't mentioned to her. Detective Morrison's team had also positioned themselves throughout the house and yard. At 5:45 p.m., I went down to the basement wearing a wire and carrying the unsigned power of attorney papers. My heart was pounding, but I was determined to see this through. Jessica arrived exactly on time, looking pleased with herself. I'm glad you came to your senses, Carol. I want you to know that I understand exactly who you are, I said quietly. You're a predator who targets vulnerable people for their money, but you made one mistake. You picked the wrong victim. Her confident expression faltered. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that you've been under investigation for weeks. I'm talking about the recordings I have of you admitting that you intended to hurt me more seriously when you pushed me down these stairs. I'm talking about the forensic evidence showing that you've been illegally accessing my financial information. Jessica's face went pale, then flushed with rage. You're lying. Am I? Let me tell you what's going to happen, Jessica. You're going to be arrested for elder abuse, assault, financial fraud, and attempted murder. You're going to prison, and you're not getting a penny of my money. You can't prove anything, she screamed. Actually, I can prove everything, including this conversation, which is being recorded right now. That's when Jessica completely lost control. She lunged at me with a fury I'd never seen before, her hands reaching for my throat. But this time, I was ready for her. I stepped aside, and she stumbled past me, crashing into the shelving unit where I'd stored Robert's belongings. As she turned to come at me again, Detective Morrison and 2 officers burst through the basement door. Police, stop where you are! Jessica was arrested, on the spot, screaming about conspiracies and denying everything even as the officers read her rights. The recording equipment had captured her threats, her confession to pushing me down the stairs, and her attempted assault. The fallout was swift and devastating. When Marcus returned from his business trip the next day, I had to tell him everything. He was shocked, heartbroken, and initially refused to believe that his wife was capable of such things. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, the financial fraud investigation, the testimony from witnesses. Mom, I'm so sorry, he said, tears streaming down his face. I should have seen what she was doing. I should have protected you. You couldn't have known, I told him, though part of me was still hurt by how easily he'd been manipulated. She's very good at what she does. The criminal trial was a media sensation. Jessica maintained her innocence throughout, but the evidence against her was insurmountable. She was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 12 years in prison. The judge specifically noted the premeditated nature of her crimes and the vulnerability of her victim. During the sentencing hearing, I was allowed to give a victim impact statement. I looked directly at Jessica as I spoke. "You tried to steal more than my money," I said. "You tried to steal my dignity, my independence, and my relationship with my son. You failed, and now the world knows exactly what kind of person you are." Jessica was also ordered to pay restitution, though since she had no assets of her own, it was largely symbolic. More importantly, the conviction meant that she could never inherit anything from my estate, even if my will had still included her, which of course it didn't. 6 months after Jessica's conviction, I invited Marcus to Harold's office for the reading of my updated will. He'd been through therapy to deal with the trauma of discovering his wife's true nature, and our relationship had slowly begun to heal. "Mom, you don't need to do this now," he said as Harold prepared to read the document. "You're healthy and could live another 20 years. I want you to know where you stand," I said gently. Harold read the will aloud. Marcus would inherit a trust fund worth $500,000, enough to live comfortably but not enough to attract another gold digger. The family home would go to him as well, but only after my death, and with the stipulation that it never be sold to pay debts or settlements related to Jessica. The bulk of my estate, over $3.8 million, would go to the Carol Henderson Foundation for Elder Abuse Prevention, which I'd established to help other seniors who might find themselves in situations like mine. "There's also a separate trust for your future children," I told Marcus, "if you're ever blessed to have them with someone who loves you for who you are, not what you might inherit." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Mom, I don't deserve even this much after what I put you through." "You're my son," I said simply. "You made mistakes, but you're not evil like she was. You have a chance to build a better life now." A year later, Marcus did indeed start building that better life. He'd moved back into the downtown condo I'd vacated, leaving me in peaceful possession of the family home. He was dating a wonderful woman named Sarah who worked as a teacher and had no idea about our family's financial situation. More importantly, she genuinely seemed to care about Marcus as a person. The Carol Henderson Foundation had become my passion project. We'd helped dozens of seniors escape abusive situations and had successfully prosecuted several cases of elder fraud. I spoke regularly at conferences and had even written a book about my experience. I never did remarry, but I wasn't lonely. Eleanor visited frequently. I had a circle of friends from my foundation work, and Marcus and I talked several times a week. Our relationship was different now, more honest, more equal, but it was also stronger than it had ever been. Sometimes people asked me if I regretted not seeing through Jessica's deception sooner. The answer was no. I'd learned that evil can be very convincing, especially when it targets our desire to believe the best about people we love. But I'd also learned that strength and wisdom can grow from the worst experiences. Jessica sent me a letter from prison on the 2nd anniversary of her conviction. She claimed to have found religion and asked for my forgiveness. I read it once and then threw it away. Some people deserve forgiveness, but forgiveness has to be earned, and Jessica had shown no real remorse for her actions. Besides, I was too busy living my life to spend time thinking about hers. I'd won more than just a legal victory. I'd won back my independence, my dignity, and my future. I'd also discovered that at 72, I was far from helpless. In the end, Jessica had been right about one thing. Accidents do happen to elderly people. Sometimes they fall downstairs, and sometimes they fall from grace. But sometimes, if they're smart and brave enough, they land on their feet and walk away stronger than before. And sometimes, the people who push them are the ones who end up at the bottom. The end up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.